In August 1886, at the very end of the 19th century, a band of Chiricahua Apaches led by Geronimo came to a halt amid the scorching rocks of the Sierra Madre Mountains. The air shimmered with unbearable heat, and the American cavalrymen pursuing them were already fainting from dehydration just a few miles behind. Geronimo looked at the completely dry, rocky ground, where a modern tourist would see nothing but certain doom and endless sand. The Apache leader confidently pointed to a barely noticeable depression between two boulders, ordering his warriors to begin carefully digging out the dry riverbed. It was at that very moment that the fate of the entire band, trapped between the advancing army and the merciless desert, was being decided. What if I told you that everything you believed about surviving in the wild is completely untrue? Modern culture has convinced us that without sophisticated navigation devices and water supplies, a person is doomed in the barren lands of the Southwest. However, the history of indigenous peoples completely debunks this myth, demonstrating a completely different level of understanding of geography and natural processes. Are you ready to learn the truth about the hidden survival mechanisms that allowed entire tribes to thrive in extreme conditions? This knowledge long remained a mystery to colonizers attempting to subjugate the indomitable peoples of the desert. In this episode, we'll take a detailed look at the specific geological markers that allowed Native Americans to find water in less than 60 minutes. We'll compare their phenomenal speed with the capabilities of a modern traveler equipped with the latest satellite communication systems. You'll see how the Apaches built a complex system of defensive rings around these hidden water reservoirs. The story will unfold through the lens of the decisions made by specific resistance leaders, such as the legendary Geronimo. Watch the video until the end, and you'll learn how this ancient skill once saved an entire squad from certain death, proving its superiority over any gadget. The Apache did not search for water on the surface. They read the landscape as a complex three-dimensional map of underground water flows. For the Chiricahua leader Cochise, the desert was not a lifeless expanse. It was a dynamic system of hidden pathways. The chief taught his people to see not what lay before their eyes, but what was hidden beneath the thick layer of rock. This philosophy differed radically from the European approach, which relied solely on visible rivers and large lakes. A modern tourist with a GPS device usually looks for blue dots on the screen, completely ignoring the actual terrain. A native of the region would analyze the slope of the rock strata, understanding where water would flow after rare rains. If the sandstone layers were interrupted by dense outcrops of granite, this indicated the presence of a natural underground barrier to water. In such places, moisture accumulated at a shallow depth, forming hidden reservoirs inaccessible to evaporation. It was precisely these invisible barriers that became the main targets for the caravans during their long treks across the desert. The skill of reading the rock required years of practice and a deep understanding of the local geology. As both a diplomat and a warrior, Victorio often used this knowledge to select sites for important tribal councils. He knew exactly which canyons would have underground reservoirs, full even during the driest season of the year. This made it possible to gather large groups of people to discuss treaties without the risk of depleting resources. Geology dictated not only migration routes, but also the political decisions of entire tribal confederations. The topography of the Chihuahuan Desert holds many deceptive traps for the inexperienced traveler. Deep canyons may seem like the ideal place to look for streams, but they often turn out to be completely dry channels. The Apache knew that they should not search in the deepest places, but rather where the color of the rock changes. A dark streak on light-colored limestone at the base of a hill often indicated capillary rise of moisture. This was a sure sign that water lay just a few dozen centimeters below the surface. An important aspect of survival was understanding the seasonal changes in groundwater levels across different regions. Mangas Coloradas, one of the most influential chiefs, masterfully planned diplomatic missions with these fluctuations in mind. He mapped out the routes for his embassies so that their encampments would coincide with the peak filling of the underground cisterns. A miscalculation could cost the entire delegation their lives under the scorching summer sun. The accuracy of these forecasts astonished American military personnel, who constantly faced shortages of provisions. The search process began long before people ran out of water in their travel water bags. Soldiers scanned the horizon for specific fissures and shadows, indicating the soil structure. Even the shape of a dried-up riverbed could tell an experienced tracker the speed and direction of the underground current. Wide, flat riverbeds usually offered little hope of success, as the water flowed too deep beneath them. Narrow, winding channels with rocky bottoms were far more promising for a quick search for moisture. It is interesting to note that this knowledge was passed down not through dry instructions, but through stories and legends. The elders recounted the path of a drop of water through the earth, creating vivid mental images in the minds of the young. This system of education allowed for the memorization of vast amounts of geographical information without the use of writing. Cultural memory became the nation's primary tool for survival, under intense pressure from the colonizers. The loss of this memory would have meant the inevitable demise of the entire people in the harsh conditions of the Southwest. The ability to distinguish between salty and mineralized springs and those suitable for drinking was of immense importance. Some underground aquifers contained water that could cause severe poisoning and accelerate dehydration. The Apache determined water quality by the tiniest salt crystals on the soil's surface around a hidden spring. A whitish coating served as a stern warning that digging in that spot was strictly forbidden. This knowledge saved lives during rapid forced marches, when there was simply no time for mistakes. This level of integration with the natural environment made the Chiricahua virtually invulnerable on their own territory. They could move through the desert at incredible speeds without burdening themselves with heavy supplies of provisions. The U.S. Army, by contrast, was tied to cumbersome supply trains laden with barrels, which significantly slowed the movement of their columns. This difference in logistics determined the course of many conflicts throughout decades of confrontation. The art of spotting the invisible became the key tactical advantage in defending their homeland. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think about this level of understanding of nature? Share your thoughts in the comments. When Mangas Coloradas chose a site for a base camp, he never set it up right next to water. This seemed illogical to Europeans, who always built their forts right next to rivers and lakes. However, for the indigenous peoples of the Southwest, a water source was the most vulnerable spot, attracting unwanted attention. Therefore, they developed a unique system of defensive rings and desert adaptation around hidden water bodies. The camp was located at a considerable distance from the point where the vital water was obtained. This distance was calculated so that the journey for water would take a certain amount of time but remain safe. The settlement itself was camouflaged among the rocks, or in the folds of the terrain, blending in with the surrounding rugged landscape. Access to the water source was strictly regulated and monitored by sentries stationed on commanding heights. Any outsider approaching the water was immediately detected long before they could harm the community. The first defensive ring consisted of a system of visual surveillance covering all approaches to the hidden reservoir. Warriors took up positions on the cliffs, from which they had a perfect view for many miles around. The second ring consisted of false trails that led inexperienced pursuers away from the actual spring. The third ring was located directly at the excavation site, where armed guards were always on duty. This multi-layered structure ensured maximum safety for families while they rested and replenished their supplies. Adaptation to the desert was evident in the strict discipline regarding water consumption within the camp itself. The community knew the exact flow rate of the hidden spring and never drew more water than nature could replenish. This sustainable practice ensured that water would not suddenly run out during a prolonged siege or drought. Tribal leaders bore personal responsibility for ensuring that every member of the extended family adhered to these norms. Violating the rules of resource distribution was considered a serious offense that jeopardized everyone's survival. For American troops trying to locate these camps, the defensive rings became an insurmountable barrier. Cavalry units often passed within a few hundred meters of a water source, without even suspecting its existence. The soldiers searched for traditional Native American settlements along streams, wasting time on futile maneuvers. The Apaches, meanwhile, calmly observed their movements from their hidden positions, remaining completely unnoticed. A lack of understanding of the principles of desert adaptation cost the colonizers enormous losses due to heat and exhaustion. Organizing such encampments required in-depth engineering knowledge and an understanding of the enemy's psychology. Chief Cochise often set up his camps in the Dragoon Mountains, using natural rock labyrinths for protection. He established a system of outposts that could transmit signals using mirrors or smoke. Information about the enemy's approach reached the central camp several hours before actual contact. This gave the community enough time to pack up their tents and vanish without a trace into the mountains. Water was delivered to the camp in special woven jugs coated with pinon pine resin to ensure they were watertight. These vessels were lightweight, durable, and remained cool even in the intense midday heat. The women responsible for supplying the camp with water traveled along secret trails, leaving no clear traces on the ground. Their routes changed constantly to avoid creating well-trodden paths that might reveal the location of the spring. Every aspect of daily life was governed by strict rules of security and concealment. The complexity of this system demonstrates the high level of social organization among the peoples of the Southwest. These were not chaotic groups of nomads, as they were often described in American newspapers of the time. It was a highly structured society, capable of coordinating complex actions under extreme conditions. Diplomatic decisions regarding the relocation of camps were made collectively, taking into account the opinions of elders and scouts. Every decision was based on precise data regarding the state of hidden water resources in the region. The effectiveness of these defensive rings allowed the Apaches to successfully resist enemy forces that vastly outnumbered them for decades. They maintained control over their territories, denying the U.S. Army access to vital supply hubs. This tactic forced the U.S. government to shift from open combat to grueling peace negotiations. An understanding of the logic of the desert proved stronger than the industrial military machine of the 19th century. Want to know the secret that made it possible to find these hidden water sources so quickly? Geological markers were only half the story. The other half lay in the ability to read the language of plants. The desert vegetation served as a highly accurate map for those who knew how to interpret its signals correctly. The great leader Cochise taught his scouts to pay attention to the slightest changes in the shades of green on the horizon. Even a single unusual bush could mean salvation for an entire detachment exhausted by a long march. A modern tourist with a GPS sees a monotonous landscape of thorns and dry grass. For the indigenous people, each plant species was a clear indicator of the depth of the water table. For example, the creosote bush grows where there is practically no water, indicating extremely dry areas. The presence of certain species of willows or cottonwood trees, on the other hand, unmistakably signaled the proximity of a constant water source. Finding such trees meant finding life. Even if the Earth's surface was covered with a crust of baked clay, of particular importance were indicator plants whose root systems were capable of reaching deep aquifers. The mesquite tree can send its roots down to a depth of 30 meters, reaching stable underground water tables. If scouts noticed that the mesquite leaves looked unnaturally bright during a severe drought, they understood the significance of the phenomenon. It meant that the tree's roots had found an abundant source of water, which could be reached with the right tools. It was precisely these anomalies that became the primary targets when selecting a site for an emergency stop. But trees weren't the only markers. Grasses and shrubs also provided vital information to the trackers. Thickets of reeds or cattails in deep canyons were a 100% guarantee of moisture beneath the layer of sand. Even if a riverbed had dried up several months earlier, the roots of these plants continued to retain precious water. The warriors of Victoria's detachment could spend hours scanning the hillsides, searching for narrow strips of specific vegetation. These green lines traced the contours of hidden geological faults along which life-giving moisture seeped. It was important to take the time of day into account when reading these plant markers in intense heat. Early in the morning, before sunrise, certain plant species secreted tiny droplets of condensation on their leaves. A trained eye could detect the distinctive sheen of these droplets from a distance of several hundred meters. During the day, this sheen disappeared, and the landscape once again appeared gray and lifeless to the untrained eye. Therefore, the most important reconnaissance missions were always conducted during the brief hours of dawn twilight. In addition, the Indians paid attention to the behavior of insects, though we won't go into those details here. The essence lay in a comprehensive analysis of dozens of subtle signs that came together to form a single picture. The famous warrior Lozin possessed a phenomenal gift for synthesizing this information faster than other scouts. She could analyze the color of the soil, the angle of a cliff, and the type of vegetation in a matter of seconds. Her decisions about where to set up camp were always spot on, which saved her unit countless times. This botanical code was completely incomprehensible to the American soldiers who had arrived from the eastern states. They were accustomed to seeking out full-flowing rivers and had absolutely no idea how to survive amid thorny thickets. Cavalrymen might set up camp just a few meters from a hidden spring and suffer from terrible thirst, Officers wrote angry reports to Washington, complaining about the barrenness and hostility of the conquered territories. They did not realize that the land was full of resources for those who knew how to speak its language. The system of botanical knowledge was integrated into the culture through everyday practices and rituals. The gathering of medicinal herbs was accompanied by teaching young community members how to read the landscape. This ensured the continuous transmission of vital information from one generation to the next. The loss of land and forced resettlement dealt a colossal blow to this unique system of knowledge. However, during the years of active resistance, these skills provided an overwhelming tactical advantage over the enemy. Every decision regarding the group's movement depended on the leader's ability to correctly read the desert's green map. It was a high-stakes game where a single mistake could mean the death of an entire family or detachment. The precision with which they identified campsites is a source of admiration even for modern geologists. They turned their knowledge into a reliable shield against the expansion of a powerful industrial nation. Guess how long the actual process of extracting water took after discovering such a marker? Modern people, equipped with satellite maps and ground-penetrating radar, often need hours to confirm the presence of groundwater. Geological expeditions deploy heavy drilling equipment, conduct soil surveys, and analyze data on computers. This process requires a significant investment of time, the involvement of specialists, and enormous energy resources. In an extreme situation, while waiting for such assistance, a person could simply die of heat stroke. For a band of Apaches in the 19th century, the time equation was solved in a completely different way. After visually spotting a green marker or the right geological fault line, the process took less than an hour. The group's leader quickly assigned tasks to the warriors, turning the excavation into a highly efficient and well-coordinated operation. Speed was critical, as stopping in open terrain left the party vulnerable to pursuers. Every minute of delay increased the risk of being detected by American cavalry patrols. The process began with clearing the top, completely dry layer of soil at the chosen spot. Instead of heavy shovels, the Native Americans used pointed sticks made of hard wood, which they always carried with them. These simple tools allowed them to quickly and silently remove stones and compacted sand without attracting attention. If the ground felt cooler to the touch, this served as the first confirmation that the chosen spot was correct. At that moment, the pace of work increased, since the life-saving moisture was already just a few dozen centimeters below the surface. It is interesting to compare this method with the actions of the regular U.S. Army under similar conditions. American soldiers often tried to dig deep wells in random locations. Driven by desperation, they expended their last reserves of strength on large-scale excavation under the scorching sun, exacerbating their dehydration. Officers tried using explosives to break through rock formations, which only destroyed the fragile aquifers. Their methods were noisy, time-consuming, and in most cases led to catastrophic failures. The Apaches, however, understood that water in the desert does not tolerate rough interference or large-scale excavations. When a hole reached moist sand, digging would immediately stop so as not to damage the natural filter. Bundles of dry grass or small twigs from certain shrubs were placed at the bottom of the small depression. This structure acted as a sponge and filter, preventing the sand from clouding the precious liquid as it flowed in. The water began to slowly seep through the layers of soil, collecting in the prepared hole, crystal clear. The entire process, from the first strike of the stick to the appearance of the first drops, took about 40 minutes. During this time, the warriors managed to organize a circular defense and prepare vessels for transporting the resource. Geronimo personally supervised these stops, knowing the value of every drop under the conditions of relentless pursuit. He demanded absolute silence and maximum concentration from every member of his small but agile detachment. It was precisely this speed of decision-making and task execution that made them virtually impossible for the army to catch. Modern tourists with GPS often find themselves in trouble, precisely because they trust technology more than reality. A navigator might point to a water source that dried up a decade ago, dooming a person to a fruitless search. The hiker spends hours trekking from one false lead to another, wasting precious time and energy. A native relied on up-to-date knowledge of the terrain, which could not be found on any paper map. This direct interaction with nature ensured an unmatched ability to adapt to changing conditions. The speed at which water was found determined the pace of the entire military campaign and the diplomatic pressure on the region. The ability to cross arid plateaus in a couple of days gave the Native Americans a tremendous advantage in maneuverability. The cavalry, forced to move from one known water source to another, took weeks to cover the same distance. This temporary superiority allowed resistance leaders to dictate their terms in negotiations with the American authorities. The time spent searching for water was directly proportional to their chances of preserving their freedom. Thus, in less than an hour, the Apaches obtained what the Army had organized large-scale expeditions to find. This skill was not merely a matter of luck. It was the result of a centuries-long process of refining survival techniques. It demonstrates that true effectiveness lies not in the complexity of tools, but in a deep understanding of the environment. Do you think this ancient method could save a life in a critical situation? Finding a hidden water source in the desert was only the first step toward the survival of an entire people. The real challenge lay in organizing access to water and keeping it clean for future generations. Leaders such as Victorio established strict laws governing the use of every water source they discovered. These rules were not mere recommendations, but strict diplomatic protocols within the tribal alliance. When a group arrived at a site, water was never drawn directly with dirty utensils or hands. Special tubes made from hollow plant stems were used to extract water from narrow sandy holes. A person would carefully suck out the water and pour it into a leather water bag without disturbing the source. This process required patience, but ensured that the water remained clear and suitable for others. Violating this rule and contaminating the hole was considered a crime against the entire community. It is important to understand that many springs were seasonal, and their supply was strictly limited by geological constraints. The elders possessed a remarkable ability to visually estimate the volume of available water based on the rate at which the well filled. Based on this assessment, a decision was made regarding how many days the party could remain at a given campsite. If the spring was meager, an immediate decision was made to continue on, despite the people's fatigue. Emotions never took precedence over the harsh mathematical calculation of survival in extreme conditions. This system differed radically from the behavior of European settlers and military personnel in the same territories. Cavalry units often scooped out any wells they found until they were completely dry, turning them into muddy messes. They did not bother to restore the water source, as they planned to move on without a second thought for the future. Such a barbaric attitude led to the destruction of fragile ecosystems and the depletion of entire regions of the Southwest. The Apaches saw this not merely as foolishness, but as a fundamental violation of the laws of the universe. Diplomatic relations between various indigenous groups were often built around the right to access water. Marital alliances and peace treaties secured the shared use of large hidden reservoirs during periods of drought. Cochise used his control over strategic water sources in the Dragoon Mountains as a powerful bargaining chip in negotiations. He could grant passage through his lands to friendly tribes or block the way for enemies. Water became the primary currency in the complex political game of the 19th century. Keeping the spring a secret was another critical task for ensuring national security. After the group filled their vessels, the excavation site was carefully camouflaged to restore it to its original state. The hole was filled with dry sand, stones were placed on top, and any traces of human presence on the ground were smoothed out. To a passing patrol, the site once again looked like an ordinary dry riverbed or a rocky scree slope. This practice of concealment drove even the most experienced trackers of the United States Army to despair. Water management required a high level of internal discipline and trust in their leaders. During long treks, water rations were distributed strictly according to schedule, regardless of a person's status. Geronimo always drank last, setting a personal example of self-restraint and responsibility toward his people. Such behavior strengthened the chief's authority and maintained high morale among the warriors, even in the most difficult situations. It was a policy of fairness forged under the constant threat of dehydration. It was precisely thanks to this careful stewardship of resources that the Apaches were able to return to the same camps year after year. They created a sustainable system of resource management that allowed them to live in harmony with the harsh landscape. The destruction of these hidden water supply systems became one of the main objectives of American military campaigns. The generals realized that the only way to defeat the resistance was to cut off its access to vital water. But how exactly did this knowledge play out in practice during critical moments in history? In the summer of 1881, the elderly Chief Nana led one of the most daring raids in the history of the Southwest. His band of 4 warriors was pursued by thousands of General Crook's cavalrymen across the entire territory of New Mexico. The army had cut off all known wells, rivers, and lakes, hoping to wear the Indians down under the scorching sun. The noose was tightening, and American officers were already preparing to celebrate an easy and bloodless victory. Nana led his men into the very heart of the arid desert, where the soldiers were simply afraid to venture. The detachment marched continuously for several days, leaving behind the exhausted horses of the American cavalry. The warriors' strength was running out. Their water supplies in the leather bags had dried up, and the temperature at noon exceeded 40 degrees. Surrounded by scorching sand, Nana halted the group at an inconspicuous cluster of limestone boulders. To any European, this place looked like a blazing furnace, promising nothing but an agonizing death. Drawing on his vast experience, the old chief ordered them to begin digging at the base of the largest rock. He had noticed a distinctive micro-relief and a faint shadow, indicating a hidden fissure in the bedrock. The warriors began digging with their wooden sticks, flinging the dry, scorching sand aside. American patrols were only a few hours' ride away, and tension within the detachment had reached its peak. At a depth of about 1 meter, the sand suddenly darkened, and the air filled with a long-forgotten musty smell. This moment proved to be a turning point in the entire campaign, completely derailing the American command's plans. Nana hadn't just found water. He had found a massive underground reservoir capable of quenching the thirst of his entire unit. In less than an hour, the hole filled with clear, cool water that saved the lives of dozens of people. The warriors quenched their thirst, filled their containers, and carefully camouflaged the site of their miraculous rescue. When the cavalry arrived in the area the next day, they found only an empty, lifeless desert. The American soldiers were forced to turn back, having no supplies of their own, to continue the pursuit. They lost track of Nana's detachment, which had pulled off an impossible maneuver thanks to its ancient knowledge of the land. This raid went down in history as an example of the indigenous people's unmatched tactical skill and endurance. Generals wrote angry reports, unable to comprehend how a group of people could survive without any visible sources of supplies. They had encountered a system of knowledge that rendered traditional methods of warfare completely ineffective. The case of Nana's detachment vividly demonstrates that geological markers worked flawlessly in the hands of experts. This was not a one-time stroke of luck, but the result of the systematic application of deep knowledge of nature. The chief was able to integrate landscape interpretation, the organization of excavations, and the discipline of water distribution into a single process. This saved his community from annihilation and allowed them to continue the struggle for their ancestral lands. Human intellect and experience proved stronger than the enemy's numerical superiority and firepower. Such episodes strengthened the Native Americans' faith in their own strength and in the correctness of their chosen path of resistance. They understood that as long as they knew the secrets of their land, they would remain invincible within its borders. Every pit they discovered was a small victory in the vast war for the right to exist. Knowledge was passed down to young warriors right at the excavation sites, ensuring continuity across generations. The desert was not an enemy, but a stern teacher and a reliable ally to those who knew how to listen. The story of this rescue remained hidden in the archives for a long time, so as not to undermine the authority of the army leadership. Admitting defeat at the hands of a small group of people armed with digging sticks was too humiliating for the generals. However, it is precisely such moments that reveal the true picture of the clash between two fundamentally different civilizations in the Southwest. Industrial might took a backseat to millennia of experience interacting with an extreme environment. Would you like to know exactly how they purified water from these underground springs? The secret that will revolutionize the survival industry lies in the filtration methods devised by indigenous peoples. Simply finding water in the desert wasn't enough. It was often mixed with sand, clay, or small stones. Drinking such a mixture could lead to serious digestive problems and rapid loss of strength. Therefore, the Apache developed ingeniously simple, yet incredibly effective ways to purify this precious water right on the spot. These methods required no chemicals or complex equipment, using only what nature provided. The main filter consisted of fibers from local vegetation, specifically shredded agave or yucca leaves. Warriors carefully trimmed the sharp edges off the leaves and pounded the pulp with stones until a fibrous mass was formed. This mass was packed tightly into a small depression dug next to the main water source. Water slowly flowed from the first pit into the second, seeping through the dense layer of plant fibers. All impurities remained on the fibers, while crystal clear, transparent liquid flowed into the second pit. Another method involved using the properties of certain types of sand and charcoal from old campfires. Charcoal is an excellent natural absorbent, capable of absorbing not only dirt, but also certain toxins. Warriors made a multi-layered filter of grass, sand, and crushed charcoal right inside their leather water bags. As water passed through these layers, its taste improved significantly, and it became safe to drink. This was especially important when using stagnant, hidden water sources during long periods of drought. Leaders such as Mangas Coloradas paid close attention to the health of their people during campaigns. They knew that an infection spread through contaminated water could wipe out a unit faster than soldiers' bullets. Therefore, the filtration process was strictly mandatory, even when people were suffering from unbearable thirst. Hygiene standards were maintained at the highest level, which astonished American doctors of the time. It was a deliberate approach to preserving the nation's combat readiness and survival in harsh conditions. Vines were used to make jugs for storing purified water, which were carefully coated with pine resin, both inside and out. These vessels, called tuss, were a masterpiece of engineering by the indigenous peoples of the American Southwest. The resin not only ensured complete watertightness, but also gave the water a light, pleasant pine scent. The jug's shape, with its narrow neck, minimized evaporation and prevented moisture from spilling when running at a fast pace. Two such jugs slung over the shoulder provided a warrior with a supply sufficient for several days of intense travel. An important feature was that the vine jugs were lightweight and did not break when dropped. Unlike the heavy glass bottles or metal canteens of the American cavalry, they were ideal for the desert. The porous structure of the resin allowed a minimal amount of moisture to seep out and evaporate in the wind. This evaporation created a natural cooling effect, keeping the water inside the gourd cool even in the heat. The warm, unpleasant water carried by American soldiers stood in stark contrast to the cool, refreshing water in the Native Americans' arsenal. Such everyday technologies were developed over centuries through trial and error under the harshest conditions of natural selection. Every decision was refined down to the smallest detail, as the lives of every member of the community depended on it. Training in the manufacture of filters and jugs began at an early age and was mandatory for everyone. This created a society in which every person was a highly skilled survival expert. The loss of even a single element in this technological chain could have fatal consequences. Modern portable water filters operate on similar principles, using charcoal and membranes. However, the Apache methods were entirely eco-friendly and did not require replacement plastic cartridges. They demonstrate a harmonious coexistence with nature, where humans take only as much as is necessary. These ancient practices make us reflect on our modern approach to the consumption of natural resources. But how exactly did this knowledge become a decisive factor in a diplomatic standoff? The U.S. Army, equipped with the best weapons of its time, proved powerless against the enemy's geographical knowledge. Generals Nelson Miles and George Crook spent years trying to devise a strategy to defeat the elusive raiding parties. They planned classic military campaigns, relying on supply lines and large stationary forts. However, the desert and its true masters dictated entirely different rules of warfare. The U.S. Army's logistics were built around the need to regularly water thousands of horses and soldiers. Convoys carrying huge wooden barrels crawled across the desert at a snail's pace, making them easy targets. Officers were forced to tie their routes to known full-flowing rivers, moving predictably through the valleys. The Apaches, aware of these limitations, simply retreated into the arid mountains, becoming completely out of reach for their pursuers. The strategy of quickly searching for hidden water paralyzed the massive military machine of the industrial nation. Geronimo brilliantly exploited this weakness of the U.S. Army in his raids and retreats. He could lead his band across the scorching plateau, knowing the exact locations of hidden water sources. The cavalry, attempting to pursue him closely, inevitably faced a catastrophic shortage of provisions and water. Soldiers lost their bearings, horses collapsed from exhaustion, and the unit's morale plummeted. As a result, entire regiments returned to the forts without firing a single shot, completely defeated by nature itself. Diplomatic negotiations often took place against the backdrop of these logistical failures by the American command. The chiefs understood that the army was incapable of controlling the territory until it resolved the water supply problem. This knowledge gave them confidence and allowed them to demand better terms when negotiating peace treaties. They viewed the generals not as all-powerful conquerors, but as people dependent on slow supply trains. Geography became the main bargaining chip in their efforts to preserve their ancestral lands. The U.S. government spent millions of dollars mapping water sources in Arizona and New Mexico. They hired scouts from other tribes to uncover the secrets of the desert reservoirs. However, many water sources remained hidden, as finding them required a specific way of thinking, not just a map. The West's technological approach clashed with the indigenous people's millennia-old empirical knowledge and lost. This logistical war of attrition became one of the most dramatic chapters in 19th century history. Crook eventually realized that the only way to defeat the Apaches was to adopt their methods of movement. He began forming mobile detachments that traveled light, abandoning heavy supply wagons. This shifted the balance of power. But even then, the Americans were outmatched by the Native Americans in their ability to locate water quickly. The soldiers still could not interpret geological markers and were dependent on guides. The conflict turned into a grueling game of survival, where nature was the harshest judge. This historical process demonstrates that technology does not always guarantee victory over a deep understanding of the environment. Traditional survival methods proved far more resilient and effective under extreme conditions. The ability to secure water within an hour thwarted the plans of Washington's finest military minds. It was a triumph of human observation and adaptation over the rigid structures of the regular army. And this triumph compels us to take a fresh look at the conclusion of this historical drama. We return to that very scene in the scorching rocks of the Sierra Madre, where our story began. Geronimo's band, having quenched their thirst from an underground reservoir they had found, watched their pursuers' maneuvers from above. Once again, they had proven their superiority in the art of survival, leaving the American cavalry empty-handed. Yet in the eyes of the old leader, there was no triumph of victory, only deep exhaustion and an understanding of the inevitable. He realized that the problem lay not in water, but in the endless numbers of American soldiers. Geronimo looked at his hands, which could find moisture in the driest rock, but could not stop time. The desert was their trusted ally, but it could not protect their families from new diseases. The war of attrition demanded enormous resources, and despite tactical victories, the tribe was strategically dwindling. The pressure on the community grew with each passing day, and the constant movements deprived the children of a normal childhood and a sense of security. The leader of the resistance faced the most difficult choice of his long and battle-filled life. In the fall of 1886, Geronimo made the historic decision to lay down his arms and surrender to General Nelson Miles. This decision was not the result of a defeat in the desert. They had not died of thirst, nor had they been captured. It was a deliberate diplomatic move, aimed at saving what remained of his people from total annihilation. The chief traded his boundless freedom in the mountains for the faint hope of saving the lives of women and children. Thus ended the era of the Great Desert Wars, which had lasted for several decades in the Southwest. Geronimo's surrender marked the end of an entire historical period and way of life for the region's indigenous peoples. The unique knowledge of finding water, passed down for centuries, began to be rapidly lost under the conditions of the reservations. Without constant practice in the wilderness, the complex system of reading the landscape became nothing more than the legends of the elders. The industrial age finally took over the desert, laying railroads and water pipelines across it. The geometry of survival gave way to the geometry of concrete dams and artificial canals. However, the journey of Geronimo and his people left an indelible mark on the history of military strategy and anthropology. Their ability to stand up to a vast empire, relying solely on their knowledge of nature, commands deep respect. They showed the world that true strength lies in harmony with the environment, not in fighting against it. The hero's final fate was tragic, but his legacy lives on in the memory of generations. Their story is not one of defeat, but a hymn to human resilience and dignity. Looking back at the events of the 19th century, we see not merely a conflict between two cultures, but a clash of worldviews. One sought to subjugate nature to mechanical processes. The other sought to integrate itself into nature's complex and subtle processes. The ability to extract water in less than an hour was a symbol of this deep understanding of the Earth's laws. And this ancient skill, despite all technological breakthroughs, has not lost its relevance even today. Why then do modern people increasingly turn to the experience of the past when it comes to survival? Today we live in an era of unprecedented technological comfort, entrusting our lives to electronic devices, satellite navigation, interactive maps, and sophisticated humidity sensors have become our guides in the wilderness. However, any experienced traveler knows that a battery can die and a GPS signal can vanish in a canyon. In such moments, a person suddenly realizes their absolute vulnerability in the face of an indifferent and harsh natural world. It is then that the methods of the indigenous peoples of the Southwest regain their vital importance. Knowledge of geological markers and plant indicators requires no electricity or internet connection. It is based on observation and an understanding of basic physical laws that have remained unchanged for thousands of years. The ability to find water in an hour using a sharpened stick is a skill that cannot be downloaded or updated. It requires mental training and a respectful attitude toward the smallest details of the world around us. This is the very independence from technology that many are now trying to rediscover. The history of the Apache teaches us that nature is never hostile. It is demanding toward those who do not understand it. Their defensive encampments, camouflage techniques, and methods of water filtration are the gold standard of eco-friendly survival. They did not fight the desert. They became part of it, learning to read its hidden signals and signs. This approach is radically different from the modern philosophy of consumption and the conquest of the environment. Perhaps a return to this kind of integration with nature will be the key to solving today's environmental crises. The journeys of Geronimo, Victorio, and Mangas Coloradas show how knowledge shapes the fate of entire peoples. Their diplomacy, military strategies, and daily lives were inextricably linked to water and land. We have traced their journey from the peaks of the Sierra Madre to the difficult decisions to surrender for the sake of their children's future. They have taught us that the most effective technologies are often found in simplicity and observation. Their military art has gone down in history as an example of perfect adaptation to extreme conditions. What other ancient knowledge of indigenous peoples do you think could be useful to us in the modern world? Suggest topics in the comments for future videos that you'd like to see on our channel. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new explorations of historical mysteries and amazing technologies from the past.